did last year. So this is very different from the other talk that I did today. This is about very much the nuts and bolts of machine learning, kind of like what you actually have to do if you want to run some experiments. This library is about taking care of a lot of the most annoying aspects of doing those kinds of machine learning experiments. So usually if you do some machine learning, it starts off with assignment to do something with a particular data set. Like maybe, just wait for a few seconds here. Speak closer to the mic.
Yeah, stay in the mic.
All right, so is that better? All right, so if you want to do some machine learning, it starts off with getting some data set. So you read a paper, and you've got an idea of what's the previous method, and you want to get to work. So you read the paper, you go to the web page for the data set, you read through the web page, try to figure out like maybe what version of it was that you're supposed to work with. Click on a download link. It takes for a while to download. You get it on your hard drive. You unpack it, and then who knows what happens when you set off this like tarball bomb. Put files all over the place. Hopefully the data set came with a README to give you a hint of what it just did to your file system. At that point, in the process of trying to explore like what that tarball included, you're going to write some kind of hacky Python script to go through the directory structure that got created. Maybe you're going to parse some text files. Maybe it's got some XML, like what have you. Data sets are all over the map. So you write some Python to kind of make sense of that. And finally, you get usable Python data structures, maybe NumPy arrays, maybe lists or dictionaries, something you can work with within Python. So that process is what SciData is trying to save you from having to do for every single data set. So it's starting off working with like benchmark data sets where it's going to do all that kind of nuts and bolts stuff for you. Having done that, then you often want to reproduce a particular experiment that somebody did for that paper, or maybe for some other paper, and you want to know exactly like which of those training samples that it unpacked was that guy using for training, what was it using for testing, what was exactly the protocol that was followed in that other work. So the second thing that SkData can do for you is it formalizes the way that the data gets used within a machine learning protocol. So this talk is going to be kind of structured about the library again. I'm just going to go through those two kinds of levels of interface. SciData has low-level components and it has high-level components. The low-level components are incredibly data-set specific, and there's almost nothing in common across them. It is very literally just a library of the annoying hacky stuff you have to do for each individual data set. High-level components are like trying to bridge the gap between that raw data and the kind of neat abstractions that machine learning algorithms are expecting. So machine learning algorithms may be expecting a matrix with features and labels. That is typically not what comes from the data set itself. So these high-level components are bridging that gap from the raw data to the thing that the algorithms can actually work on. Next slide. Right, so I'm going to go with the low level first. Low level is going to be kind of quick, and it's not going to be, intellectually all that interesting. What do all data sets have in common? Not anything at all, really, as far as I can tell. They have different kinds of file formats, different kinds of data to support different kinds of applications. People try to predict different things from different kinds of other things. The range of sizes goes from like trivial for your like in-memory iris and up to like the limits of physical storage, and so that's kind of traditionally been the abstraction barrier that has made it hard to provide generic libraries for giving access to these data sets, because they pretty much don't have anything in common to work with. ML Data and UCI are these kind of online repositories that try to do some kind of standardization, but there's only so much they can do from a language agnostic starting point. So I'm not going to try and give you any kind of, I'm just going to show two examples of data sets to get a flavor for what's in the library. this is a kind of sketch of what's the data handler for a data set called labeled faces in the wild. So this is a collection of images that are of famous people. The images have one famous person per image, and the standard protocol for how to use this data set is a kind of weird one that the data set organizers are the only one that really understand why they did it that way. And the task happens to be, the standard task that people want to do with that is to say, are two images of the same person? Did a bit of background. So that kind of description would be the kind of thing that the SciData file would have in here. So a good first level dataset module has a description of the dataset, for one thing. If you got citations, you should toss them in there. Published scores. So publications are pretty solid over time. So it's definitely appropriate to be throwing in actual published accuracy scores on this data set right in the Python file, so it's easier to produce plots. This data set here has a home function that uses SciData's central cache directory. So a big common theme of what data sets have to do is download data and put them in local storage. So SciData has a certain kind of pattern for how it encourages data sets to do that. It's got a fetch method that downloads it, cleanup method that erases it after you're finished, and it just gives this metadata, which is a list of dictionaries that have the path to the file name of the image, the name of the person in the image, and like the color space and the number of pixels and stuff that go along with that image. There's no like first principles that would have told you this is the right way to handle this. This is just like natural stuff to get you going working on this data set. The library, I mean, this data set also happens to have these quirky pairs files that say which things go with which other ones for a certain protocol. That's the only data set that has that, so there's a class that has those methods on it. This is idiosyncracy. Second example, Austin's restaurant inspection scores. A local data set with some open government, open data stuff. So I made a data set of that just for fun. You can pull this down off of data.austintexas.gov. This is a data set, pretty different from the image one. There's no images, there's no sizes, there's no names of individuals. So I just picked a strategy for how to deal with that. And still, even in this case where you can download JSON straight off the internet, there's still an opportunity for some value to be added here because the data that you get off the internet is all strings, even though many of the attributes of this data happen to be numbers, like the score. You would like for arithmetic on the score to do numeric manipulations, not string manipulations. So this dataset file provides that kind of basic level of service. So based on this kind of like low-level stuff, you can make a quick script that analyzes a data set that's in SkData. So you can just like import the data set up at the top, then you can just access the attributes in sort of familiar Python syntax, and we can make some little plots using matplotlib. These are the first 1,000 restaurants being shown by longitude and latitude, and this is the scores that they have as a histogram. So you can see Austin's doing pretty good on the food safety inspection, and 100 out of 100 is the most common score. That's encouraging for tourists. So SciData has a lot of data sets in here already. If you happen to recognize any of these, you might be happy to use it. If you have your own low-level scripty stuff that you have in your personal utils directory someplace for dealing with a certain kind of data, feel free to just like make a fairly unstructured pull request. The barrier to entry for code quality on SciData, I would say, is relatively low. Whatever you can do to help us out, whatever you can do to help us out, get some kind of like scripts that walk a directory structure that happens to go along with your favorite text data set or whatever you have, better than nothing. So yeah, just to summarize, the low-level modules provide useful unstandardized logic for like getting data from wherever it starts from into Python. And there isn't any kind of like formal abstractions that it tries to enforce, because I don't think that makes any sense. The SciData complements PyTables and pandas with like very data set specific logic for dealing with very specific data sets. So that is all I'm going to say about the low-level stuff. There's also a higher level to SciData, which is trying to structure the protocols that you'd actually use to evaluate machine learning. 10 minutes. All right, thanks. So you don't just want to get data onto, I mean, if you really want to just deal with a couple data sets, you don't even need to mess around with the high-level stuff at all. But if you do want a little bit of guidance in terms of reproducing precise experimental comparisons, then the high level can help you out. And the way the high level helps you out is by a couple of data structures. A task, which is a semantically labeled kind of subset of data. So this is probably what's traditionally in a data frame in pandas. A learning algorithm. A learning algorithm in the context of SciData is a little bit different from scikit learns learning data. So there's going to be a bit of an adapter pattern going on, but I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. And finally, the protocol itself. So I'll walk you through the precise steps that you have to follow to get a accuracy number that is comparable with, maybe a previously published result. You may be wondering how this works. This nice structured stuff works with data sets which are like infinitely large or dynamically generated or super huge. There's a kind of data structure for handling lazy evaluation that kind of kicks in to help out with logically large or physically large data sets. It's in there. It helps sometimes. I'm not going to talk any more about it right now. So those three data set structures that help at the top level are the task, the learning algorithm, and the protocol. The task is basically a namespace. It's a dictionary. It doesn't provide any kind of encapsulation of logic at all. It's just a kind of packet for communicating between the experimental protocol and the learning algorithm. So the task only has two essential keys. The first one is a name of the task within the context of the experiment. So this is like training split number 1, or this is the test set, or what have you. The second thing is the semantics. And so that gets a little bit more into the design of how this works. The semantics is a string that describes the kind of machine learning thing that you should do with this subset of your data. So what's in there now has got a big focus on image classification, but it's a very loose kind of approach to communication, so it's quite extensible. I'm just using strings like vector classification, indexed image classification, what have you. These strings indicate what other attributes are in the dictionary. So this is like the kind of, this is for doing the kind of dispatching, type-based dispatching that you do in C. It's not using classes because these objects don't actually encapsulate any kind of behavior. The learning algorithm is going to be the one that's sort of trying to deal with all these different semantics in an appropriate way. So the learning algorithm has fairly generic level commands like, give me the best model for this certain task. Compute the loss of a model on some task. Forget all about some task and get rid of all the memory that you allocated for it. And there's even some weird ones like retrain classifier. That's like most learning algorithms don't even have to do that, but it just happened to be necessary for a certain protocol, so I threw it in. The best model has to look at the semantics string and then do something appropriate. So there's something called a semantics dispatcher in there, which just kind of concatenates the best model and the semantics string. So if you really want to just say, this is a learning algorithm that only handles vector classification, then you just have to implement that one method. It will work for data sets that are doing vector classification. The next kind of thing is the protocol. The protocol view represents an interpretation of a data set. So the idea is that it's a view on the raw data that injects the kind of structure that's required for a machine learning algorithm. So it creates tasks to represent the different steps of training. So a protocol view for a k-fold validation on the iris data set, for example, will create all of the k train and test splits, We'll call best model on all the trained ones, call the loss function on all the test ones, and on the basis of those subdivisions of the data set, you can express the correct protocol for evaluating a learning algorithm. So lots of these data sets come with either standard or official evaluation protocols that are formally encoded in the SciData website library. And so you don't even need to really use these protocols. They have value just in existing. So you can read them and then re-implement them in different ways if you don't want to use the high-level modules themselves. But at least like the exact splits for being able to run these experiments are actually encoded into the SciData library. With the high-level tools, you can do cute stuff like really short machine learning experiments. So this is, try not to go too far away from the mic. This little code fragment here is going to do a little machine learning experiment on the restaurant data. So the hypothesis in question is that there's a correlation between geographic location in Austin and the food safety. So like what neighborhoods are safer to eat in than others. And it's really easy to set up this experiment. First, well, I mean, it's easy because someone went to the trouble, namely me, of actually encoding the Austin dataset evaluation protocol in the SciData library. But now that that exists, we can just import that location classification task and location classification protocol and instantiate it to do a tenfold cross-validation with a certain kind of binning of the accuracies. So this is going to group all of the accuracies from 50, which is a bare pass, up to 100, which is perfect, into 10 bins, and I'm going to get a decision tree to try and classify into each one of those bins. So for each depth of network, or each depth of decision tree from 1, 2, 4, 8, and 16, we're going to make a scikit-learn classifier that's a decision tree of the max depth. So the scikit-learn classifier here is a learning algorithm in the SciData sense that maps the protocol commands into like fit and predict, which is the interface that scikit objects provide. So there's a bit of an adapter pattern that has to happen there. So we can just create an algorithm for learning. We tell the location classification protocol, LP, to walk the learning algorithm through the necessary steps to do this experiment and collect the mean test errors. And then we can make a little plot down here that shows that, in fact, the deeper is a tree for doing location-based prediction, the poorer is the out-of-sample accuracy of that tree. What this shows is that this is only overfitting, which means that the most accurate tree for location safety in Austin is a zero-level tree, which is to say there's no correlation whatsoever between location in Austin and food safety. So originally I was disappointed, but actually that's basically a success of the public servants here in Austin, Texas. So in summary, SciData prepares data sets for machine learning by kind of bridging the gap between URLs and scikit-learn. The low-level data modules wrangle data into the kind of idiosyncratic data structures that just make sense for that low-level data. High-level modules actually turn that into features and labels and so on in ways that make sense for various machine learning experiments. The way I did that is a very loose and open-ended kind of protocol that exists between those things. And like I said before, if you have any other data sets that you have scripts lying around for, send them over. I'd be happy to include them into SciData. So thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you, James. We have some time for our speaker if he has some questions.
Yeah.
So have you ever done anything with, like, say, like a beautiful soup parser or anything to kind of like transfer, say we wanted to just mine some HTML data and put it in,
Mining some HTML data.
like website data and then like using HTML tags, like with beautiful soup or
I haven't actually done any of that. So unfortunately, there'd be no template in the library right now there would be like a way to do that. But if you have done that in the past, I would say that you're a better expert, and you should just sort of throw over whatever scripts or whatever you were doing. That's a good point of departure. Thanks. Yeah. Anybody else?
Are there examples of the data that are published earlier? I saw the iOS examples and some other examples. Are those,
Right.
Are those data, do they have links to applications that actually use them? Examples of how to use them, because this might help other people make it easier to use.
Right. So the question is, on these various data sets on that list, way back here, right, so do these data sets have links to ongoing research on them or the way they've been applied? And the answer is, where that is known, those actually are in the files, if that's possible. So for some of the data sets that I used that were in computer vision, I've put into the low-level sort of data wrangling file a dictionary that says, you know, this publication got that score, this publication got that score. So I have links to those publications. And
do you have actual code that actually uses them? Because this is for a user who first time wants to use it and wants to read the data and do something with it that is different. If they have an example, it might help them. Do you have something like that?
I don't really understand the question, sorry.
Code, actual code related that uses the data. Code that uses the iOS data that you have a link from the iOS to that code.
So like a tutorial that you
Tutorial.
have the data being extracted,
Oh,
and then
So-
example.
yeah, I'm not sure,
Applications
yeah.
that use the data. It's linked in one direction. Is there a link to the other direction? From data to application.
Right, so the question is, it's easy to find formal links from applications back to the data sets, but are there any links forward the other direction from data sets to the code that's using them? No, but that's a good idea.
Other questions? You know, one of the things that I do in my examples is always kind of add a little stub that says, this is the example in my examples that are using this data set. Usually get you those.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So, I mean, what is in here? What is in these files? For every data set, there's like just a textual description of like how to use this file. It's everyone's kind of unique, but like IPython notebooks might be another way to publicize that. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, actually, yep.
Just wondering if you're familiar with Kaggle. It seems like the sort of thing that would be really a boon to people in that community, and also a good way to grow your base set there.
Oh. So the question is, do I know about Candle? The answer is no.
Online machine learning competitions, basically. And
Oh, Kaggle. Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, I've heard of Kaggle. Some of the data sets here, or at least one of the data sets in there is a Kaggle data set. And yeah, that would be a good way to get more people interested in this by getting them to get the Kaggle data sets into here. That would make sense, yeah. One challenge with Kaggle is that you can't just download it. You have to sign up and go through the web interface. I guess someone who knows how to do that kind of stuff can probably automate that, but I don't.
I think you don't. It's not legal to do it. You have to sign an agreement by taking it.
All right, Olivia Grissel has pointed out that's illegal. Thank you, Olivier.
Anyone else? Okay, thank our speaker again.